The phone call came at 5:25 p.m. on the 12th of April 1945. Harry Truman was in House Speaker Sam Rayburn's office, nursing a bourbon and water after presiding over the Senate. It had been a quiet, uneventful Thursday for the Vice President, a man whose constitutional duty mostly involved showing up to cast the occasional tie-breaking vote. Rayburn's office, nicknamed the Board of Education, was a place where a few congressmen gathered after hours to share stories and unwind. The phone rang. Rayburn answered, listened, and his face went pale. "Something's wrong," he said. "Steve Early, Roosevelt's press secretary, needs you at the White House. Immediately." Truman didn't panic. Vice presidents were summoned to the White House occasionally. Meetings, photo ops, policy discussions, it was routine. He told his driver to take him to the main Pennsylvania Avenue entrance, but the Secret Service redirected him to the private residential door. His stomach sank. Something was seriously wrong. Eleanor Roosevelt met him in her sitting room. Calm, almost inhumanly composed, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Harry, the president is dead." Truman froze. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the man who had led America through the Great Depression and was guiding the nation through the final months of a global war, was gone, dead of a cerebral hemorrhage at Warm Springs, Georgia. When Truman finally spoke, he asked if there was anything he could do for her. Eleanor's reply became one of the most famous lines in American political history. "Is there anything we can do for you? For you are the one in trouble now." And indeed, Truman was. He had been vice president for 82 days. In that time, he had met Roosevelt privately only twice, had attended no cabinet meetings, and knew nothing of the secret weapon being developed across the country, a weapon that would change warfare forever. He had no insight into Roosevelt's negotiations with Churchill and Stalin. He didn't even know the password to access the White House map room, where military operations were tracked hour by hour. The darkness that Roosevelt had maintained around his vice president was now Truman's reality. Within 2 hours, Truman was in the cabinet room, hand raised, taking the oath as the 33rd President of the United States. His wife, Bess, and daughter, Margaret, stood beside him, both in shock. Cabinet members, men Truman barely knew, were running a war he had only read about in newspapers. Chief Justice Harlan Stone administered the oath at 7:09 p.m. The ceremony lasted less than a minute, without a Bible. Truman's hand trembled as he spoke the words. Afterward, he asked the cabinet to stay. He assured them he intended to continue Roosevelt's policies, that he needed their help and loyalty. What he couldn't say, he had no idea what most of those policies actually were. Truman's 82 days as vice president had been one of the strangest stretches in American executive history. He had watched Roosevelt's 4th inauguration, noting the president's frailty and trembling hands, but knowing and being prepared were two very different things. The vice presidency had always been peculiar, often described as insignificant, and Truman's experience was a stark amplification of that. He presided over the Senate, attended social functions, posed for photos. Roosevelt never invited him to policy discussions or cabinet meetings. The only substantial conversations had been about political appointments in Missouri, yet Truman was now president. Inheriting a nation at war, facing decisions about Germany, Japan, Stalin, Churchill, and a secret weapon he had just learned existed. Roosevelt had been secretive, compartmentalizing information and trusting almost no one with the full picture. Even cabinet members knew only fragments. Truman knew nothing, and the timing could not have been worse. The Yalta Conference in February had revealed Roosevelt's failing health. His personal physician insisted he was fine, but photographs told a different story. Churchill worried Roosevelt wouldn't live much longer. Yet Roosevelt made no effort to prepare his successor. On Saturday, the 14th of April 1945, the nation mourned. Crowds gathered along Pennsylvania Avenue for Roosevelt's funeral procession to the White House. Truman stayed in his modest Connecticut Avenue apartment, focused on briefings. He attended the White House funeral, but not the burial at Hyde Park. His reasoning was practical. Every hour spent traveling was an hour lost, preparing to make decisions affecting millions. Truman's choice was criticized. Newspapers called it a snub. Radio commentators questioned his judgment. Letters arrived from across the country, some praising his dedication, others accusing him of callousness. Truman read them, but did not waver. The president was dead. Someone had to act. By April 16, just 4 days into his presidency, Truman was learning about the Manhattan Project from Secretary of War Henry Stimson. A single memo described a weapon so powerful it could destroy a city. It had been running since 1942, employing over 125,000 people and costing nearly $2 billion, all without the vice president ever being informed. He absorbed crash courses on nuclear physics, chain reactions, uranium versus plutonium, all while casualties mounted in Okinawa and the German surrender loomed. On April 30, Hitler committed suicide. Truman, now president for 18 days, had to maintain the fragile Allied alliance and prepare for victory in Europe. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7. Truman addressed the nation on May 8. Victory in Europe Day. Solemn, steady, acknowledging the terrible human cost. Then came the full atomic briefing. Trinity, the first test, was scheduled for mid-July. Scientists debated how or whether to use the bomb. Truman, a man without a college education, now had to master questions Roosevelt had pondered for years. Decisions couldn't wait. Lives, millions of them, depended on him. Truman's sudden ascension exposed a glaring flaw in the Constitution. There was no requirement to prepare a vice president for the presidency. Previous successors had faced steep learning curves, but none had inherited a global war and atomic weapons. Changes came slowly. The National Security Act of 1947, the 25th Amendment in 1967, and evolving norms ensured modern vice presidents are now informed participants. Yet, as Truman later reflected, there was no law, no guarantee that a president would trust their vice president. Roosevelt had not. Truman had been left in the dark, but he survived. He adapted. He led. And history would judge whether his choice to stay in Washington and learn the presidency was right. In that moment, with the weight of the world pressing down, Truman did what the country needed. He stayed at his post and got to work. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.